Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Randy Bach. Today is September 20, 2021. That's a lot of 20s. And we are here today for a fascinating, I'm anticipating and I'm guessing, and I think I'm going to be right, a half-hour exposition talk with Paul Levy, famous for cleaning up Boston Harbor through the MWRA and keeping one of our major hospitals afloat. I believe it was Beth Israel. And also inspirational to many executives for having kind of used the bully pulpit in a far different way in the early 2010s, bringing blogging to an executive role. And he had, I think, a little more power maybe than he even thought himself he would have. So he's clearly a creative guy, an out-of-the-box thinker, and I try to stay in my box all the time. Thus the name Randy Bach. But anyway, so we're going to be talking about things related to the Newton public schools and Newton's finances, which are sort of ancillary to Newton public schools because it's kind of the tail wagging the dog in large extent, because a good fraction of our budget is related to that. Anyway, that's partial introduction. And I just want to give a little shout out for people who are watching the show perhaps for the first time, that we are on monthly, and we represent the Newton Taxpayers. I'll show you the logo a little bit. Newton Taxpayers Association. We're on Facebook as the Newton Taxpayers Association. We'd love a follow and popularization and money, if you can bring it, because we're going to help save you money through the Newton Taxpayers Association. Anyway, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Paul Levy. Perhaps you might want to give a slightly more comprehensive introduction to yourself, and moreover, tell us why you chose at this juncture in life. You have your accomplishments and your plaudits and relaxations, I assume. Why get into the fray in something as nasty potentially as politics in general, and perhaps the Newton situation? So perhaps, let us know.
Thanks, Randy, and thanks for having me. I've lived in Newton for about 40 years, in the same house on Oxford Road in Newton Center. I've had 3 children in the Newton public schools during that time, 2 daughters who are much older and a kindergartner now. And I've always had an interest in the schools, of course. Anybody who lives in town does. And I was thinking about how I might be able to make a contribution to the community. And I thought running for school committee might be the way to do that. As you mentioned, I have some experience that I think would be helpful and useful to the school committee. The school committee acts as kind of the board of directors of the public schools in Newton, which, as you were suggesting, is a big enterprise. It's over 60% of the city budget. And the school committee prepares that budget. The school committee also negotiates contracts with the teachers' union every 3 years, more or less, and sometimes in between. The school committee is responsible for holding the superintendent accountable, and the school committee also makes major policy decisions. And if you go into my background, running the water authority and running a hospital and serving on a lot of boards and commissions, I think there's useful experience that can be brought to bear, that I can bring to bear on that. So I thought I'd give it a try. It's my first try at elected politics. I have no political ambitions beyond this. I promise I will not use this as a stepping stone for national office.
Please do. I mean,
no, you've heard it here first.
I won't hold you to this. I mean, no, seriously, when we find quality people, our hopes and aspirations go up.
I think, though, truthfully, if you did have any political aspirations, being on a school board or a school committee is likely not the best way to proceed. But because things are controversial, because people have strongly held views about the schools and how they should be run and so on. But I'm just in this for the public service, to try to help our community, which we all love, and a school system that we love.
Okay, so I'm going to start off maybe with a joke. I'm going to try to really shorten it. Communication between, on the radio, it's like, this ship is you're heading at my ship. Could you please, change course? It says, you don't understand. We are the largest, ship in the Navy. I'm the admiral. I want you to change courses. No, respectfully, I'm just a private or whatever it is, an ensign, and I'm asking you to change. Anyway, back and forth they go, and the guy with all the pomp and circumstance, he wants the other guy, he says, I'm this, you change course. Well, respectfully, I'm a lighthouse. Will you please change course? And I bring that joke up because, one can't change course and the other one can only do it very mildly or moderately. I think it's not quite between a rock and a hard place, but people have the joke about everyone talks about the weather, but nobody can do anything about it.
Right.
So, to that end, I mean, is the Newton school system, is it a lighthouse? Is it a cruise ship? Is it able to navigate? Can it avoid hitting what I think it's aiming for, which is, it seems to be going aground a little bit. And this is a long question introduction. I apologize, but the camera's on me. So, our schools in the 90s, I think, were number 1 in the state, and now we're number 30, which is not horrible because I think they're judging out of 200 or something like that, but it's gone down relatively speaking, and we seem to be doing more. We seem to be doing less with more. Anyway, so is the situation changeable? What's the lever by which you can?
Well, I think you're right to make the point that any change is likely to be incremental in nature. There's no wholesale change in direction that is likely to come out of the school committee or the school administration. There are certain basics of education that just happen. Further, the school committee is a 9-member body. And for it to make any changes in policies requires a coalition or a consensus of those 9 members, or 5 of them at least. And the issues are not particularly simple. Take the question of grading, for example. What should be the appropriate grading system in the high schools? Well, some people say the current system is good. Other people say, no, we should reduce pressure and have A/B, pass, no record kind of grading. I'm not going to get into the merits of that discussion today, but just to say that even on that one issue, when you have 9 people in the room, plus the superintendent and his people, there are likely to be a lot of opinions about that, not to mention the teachers themselves and the families and so on. I think the most important thing, this doesn't directly answer your question, but I think the most important thing is for the school committee to be open, transparent, and responsive, and reasonably analytical when they are discussing these issues. Not to go with the latest fad or feeling, but to actually look at the research that's been done around the country and the like, and have a reasoned, thoughtful discussion. When I talk to people, a lot of families in town, what they tell me is they love the schools, they love their teachers, but when they watch the school committee in action, they say, can't we do better in terms of the level of discourse, debate, and discussion that occurs there? And I think we can. Whether that leads to an incremental change in this or that, or a global change, or a less incremental change, I don't know at this point, truthfully. But there's a lot of momentum for the way things are going.
Well, you bring up a lot of interesting points, and I could, kind of chip away at a number of them. But I find that it's almost overwhelming to keep up with it. I have to admit to the public here, I'm not like a local politics junkie. I don't watch the school committee meetings. I've been to a couple of them at different junctures, and it's been disappointing, I have to say. I don't know if you can address that, but there are some things that go on in the schools that, like, I don't know. My kids went through the Newton Public Schools. They're men now, but I'm a little bit kind of taken aback. And some of the things I hear out of it now, which is, you're talking about like removing grades, taking away homework. I don't know if you've heard this one. Yeah. I sometimes I can't believe they're true. I don't know if you know if they're true and where things stand.
Well, they're actually, during the COVID stuff, the principal of Newton South did put out an advisory to the parents and the kids and the teachers that homework would be strictly limited during that time. Where that stands right now, I'm not sure now that they're back in. But this gets to, let me just explain a little bit about the structure. So the school committee is equivalent to the board of directors of the schools, this $250 million enterprise. And as I said, one of their jobs is to hold the superintendent accountable to a high standard of performance. How do you do that? Well, as someone who's been a CEO and as someone who's supervised CEOs, I know that doing that is both an art and a science. The way the school committee does it here is they establish broad objectives for the superintendent, and then they measure him against those objectives. It's in setting those objectives that the school committee has its major role, and in evaluating him. Day to day, he and his assistant superintendents and the principals and the teachers carry out the curriculum. What rises to the level of consideration for the school committee? Is the homework issue appropriate to bring back to the school committee? People would disagree on that. Is the grading issue appropriate? Well, when it came up last year, when there was a proposal to make permanent the COVID kind of grading, A/B, pass, no record. When a number of people raised concerns about that, one of the school committee members said, well, that's not under our purview. I have a difference of opinion on that. I think it is. It's not that we're going to order the superintendent to do a certain thing, but it's certainly within our purview, or mine if I'm elected as part of that body, to question his rationale for going in a certain direction. And if you do, having served as a CEO and on boards, I will tell you that if you have an effective board, it can be very helpful to a superintendent or a CEO to get the perspective of those 9 people in making his own decisions.
Yeah, no, I like that. Teddy Roosevelt, back probably when you could say this, believed he had the bully pulpit. And what he meant by that was not our current use of the word bully. I think he meant that it was, a great thing, and it's bully. And he had the vantage, a little bit like the lighthouse guy, of seeing and saying things, and having people act upon those. And one of the things I really liked about reading your quick bio was that you understand that, and that you used that same kind of perch, the position as CEO at Beth Israel, not just to be the CEO at Beth Israel, but to, in a sense, educate and advocate for a position. And I think that's a very strong card to play, and frankly, one that maybe a lot of other people don't realize they have in their deck.
Well, and I think the tension around that, as a member of a collegial body like a school committee, is you don't want to be out in left field giving speeches and writing blog posts that are inimical to good governance, to the kind of discourse you need to make good decisions. But you also don't give up your First Amendment rights. You are allowed to go out and say things about issues that you're concerned with. So, for example, one of the things I was involved with back last winter and spring was there were a group of doctors who wanted to provide advice to the school system on how to reopen after COVID. And they were, in essence, shunted aside. They were told, we don't want to listen to you. I met with those doctors, and I helped them be heard by the State Board of Education, which has overall authority there. And as a result of their testimony before the State Board of Education, the schools were reopened. So Newton wasn't prepared to do it, but by being a bit of an activist on that and working collaboratively with a lot of doctors, actually 300 doctors, some of the world experts in infectious disease and so on, we were able to make a presentation or provide information that was useful, not only to Newton, but the whole state. Well,
so I'm going to switch gears slightly. I appreciate what you've said, first of all. Very well said.
Thank you.
But, I kind of nuts and bolts, look under the hood. I mean, again, the mechanism, I'm not a local politics junkie. I do understand kind of the unicameral system we wound up after having 2 separate houses and the way the election. I understand a little bit of this. My wife ran for council person, alder human, a few years ago. But at the end of the day, what are the things, I'll back up a little bit. My perspective is that, Newton has kind of slid a little bit. We, in the East in general, the Northeast, we have, I think, 50% more employees per student than the states in the West, like Utah, Washington, Oregon, have. It's a little bit like the comparison of roads between Massachusetts and New Hampshire. They pay like 40% less per mile of road, even though it's the same geography, same asphalt, same paint, everything. You know, we seem to be paying more and getting less than other schools. I don't think, in general, the Northeast schools are so supremely better than those in Utah, Washington, whatever. I mean, it's a broad comparison. So, you know, on one level, you know, it seems to me, I went to public school initially till 6th grade, and back then we had a teacher per classroom. We had 30 kids in the classroom, and there was a school nurse, assistant principal, secretary, and principal. That was it for the school. And now I look at the mastheads of these schools, and there's just like, it's very populated with people who aren't teachers. And I don't know how much of that really filters down to the education of the students per se, and whether there's any kind of lever that you'd have, because we're dealing with kind of this cruise ship, this monolith that is unionized and whatnot. I mean, I don't know, where do we go with this?
Well, actually, I mean, that's a really good question. So the school committee has authority over the budget and also over the priorities of the system as a whole. And it's perfectly appropriate, in fact, I would say desirable and required for the school committee to ask those kinds of hard questions, which is, what's our overall objective here? Do those rankings matter to us? Mm-hmm. If the U.S. News and World Report ranking doesn't matter to us, what does? Mm-hmm. How should we evaluate what we're doing? And then what resources do we actually need to get there? It's one thing to talk about the teachers and how many teachers there are and so on. I don't think that's particularly controversial in terms of the appropriate number of students in a class and number of teachers and aides and so on. But one of the things I did in the hospital world is I looked very closely at the administrative levels within our hospitals. You know, we had doctors and nurses, and then we had a lot of administrators doing things, and the administrative budget always seemed to go up faster than the actual clinical care budget. Mm-hmm. Now, some of that was regulatory, and you had to do it, and some of it was financial and so on. Mm-hmm. But we were always looking for ways to make our administration of the system more efficient. And those jobs are not union jobs. Those are non-union jobs where the school board and the school committee and the superintendent reach an agreement on mm-hmm. how many assistant superintendents you need and the like. And on those things, I think it is appropriate to look at other systems and say, well, if they're doing it with less, mm-hmm. are they doing it better with less or mm-hmm. worse with less? Is there something about how we've organized ourselves that's worth looking at? My view is that's all open for discussion and should be, and it's important. Because, I mean, back to your point, Randy, this is the biggest part of the city budget. It's 60% of the city budget. About 20% of the families in Newton have school-age kids. The other 80% obviously have an interest in the quality of the schools, but they also have an interest as taxpayers to know that they're getting their money's worth, just mm-hmm. as we would with the police and fire department and the like.
I appreciate that. I mean, to that point, you know, there's, I don't know if you ever watched The Lion King, but there's a circle of life. We could, spend probably a whole entire show just on that, but I'm going to leave that aside insofar as.
And I won't start singing the song. Don't worry.
We could afterwards. We'll sell extra footage. So the circle of life, such as I see it, is property value. So again, Newton taxpayers. The circle of life that we concern ourselves with is, you know, we have major investments in our homes and the city and the quality of life. A lot of those metrics have gone down. We used to be the second safest city in the country. Apparently not anymore. I don't know what number we are, but it's not that. And the school's number 1 in the state, 30, whatever. And there was a post in Village 14 by Mr. Pontiff, I think Jeffrey, and he said, comparing just to us, us-like objects, cities like us, Brookline and Weston and whatever, Wellesley and so forth, that we're like, out of 19 or something like that comparisons, we're like 16. So we're not, and they're saying, well, it could be, the school mix, the minorities, whatever, but apparently compared even to Brookline, which has kind of more urban metrics and so forth, we do worse than they. Mm-hmm. And so, hey, what's up with that? But the circle of life that I wanted to get to is that, it seems to me that in a lot of ways there is the potential impetus for the teachers to go with wanting things to be easy for the students and kind of keep the grades up or whatever, in kind of a potentially, I mean, we've seen this in certain places where this is on the worst level. This in Maspeth, Queens, New York. There's been a recent scheme, whatever, where the teachers were feeding, grades and so forth. I'm not saying anything like that happens here, but once you start getting where the schools get desperate, and the towns want the schools to be elevated, and they want to see the scores and whatnot, there's the potential that you're not necessarily getting the full story of what's happening within the schools. So that's a radioactive question. I'm going to leave it right there.
Randy, when I talk to teachers and I talk to parents, what comes across is a great commonality of belief and desire with regard to the schools. Nobody wants there to be what amounts to a fake ranking based on grade inflation and stuff like that. Overwhelmingly, when I've talked to teachers, they're well-intentioned, they're creative, they're hardworking, they want to do as well as they can. But there are teachers who have said to me directly that they get pressure sometimes from administrators to, the quote was, to give the impression that the kids are progressing. That was the direct quote I got from a middle school teacher. And this teacher was so upset and disillusioned by that because this teacher is teaching in the public schools because they really care and they want to do the job well. So I think what you're saying doesn't show up at the teacher level. It doesn't show up at the parent. The parents want real action and so on.
Right.
But I think a natural tendency of an administrative bureaucracy is, if I can use the term, teach to the test.
Right.
To show results that aren't actually reflective of what's going on. Part of what the school committee needs to do is to hold the administration accountable, saying, what are you trying to achieve? How are you measuring it? And so on. I think it's also totally appropriate for the school system to really survey the parents as to how they feel the schools are doing.
Right.
This was a suggestion Valerie Pontiff, who's running also for school committee, said to me one day, how do we know that we're doing a good job in the schools? And the answer she gave was, if the parents think so. So why aren't we asking the parents in a scientifically designed survey each year, how are we doing? I'll tell you, private schools do that all the time. And then they modify their approach based on the reactions they're getting from parents. Shouldn't we as a public system take that kind of feedback seriously too?
We have this very blunt instrument called an election. So that's coming up very shortly. And I just want to remind people that Paul Levy is running for school committee, and I think it's citywide.
It's all the school committee elections are citywide.
Right.
I'm from
so
Ward 6.
If you're watching this from other cities, we can talk about that later. But we like you to ponder this and run the show back and look at his website and so forth.
Randy, can I just say, I mean, one thing that will happen this year in this election is there'll be substantial turnover in the school committee itself. There are either going to be 4 or 5 new members in this 9-member body. And these are all people who've now been through a current election cycle and have heard from parents. So I think there could be the impetus for some changes, some improvements. The degree to which we've already talked about, how fast, how soon, how much, remains to be seen. But I think there's some people of very good will who are running, and the new body will have to figure out among itself what its priorities are.
Fair enough. So,
sorry, I interrupted your question.
No, that's fine. One of the things we talk about budgetarily at the Newton Taxpayers Association is, that we are tight for funds, and nonetheless, we seem to be adding staff in terms of the perhaps aptly named DIE, D-I-E, diversity, inclusion, and exclusion, and equity. And we're adding people to this, which one of my great tomes is If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. I don't know if you know that one. You have to give them a glass of milk. It's one thing leads to another. It's a great kids book. I recommend it. So once you have that kind of directive and director added into your system, I think you have to keep adding other staff, because that person is almost obligated to find inequities and address them and so forth. Is this going to keep with just keeping it on the school basis? How is that all going to play out?
I don't see big staff increases there, truthfully. The current administration, the school administration and the school committee decided that issue was important to focus on, and they hired an extremely competent person to head it up. But I don't get a sense from her that she's trying to build an empire, to have more and more staff. She's trying to do things by persuasion and education and the like. So I guess I'm not seeing a problem there. But let me give you another financial issue that comes up. From time to time, we need to rebuild schools that are getting old, decades old, and need to be renovated or rebuilt. Traditionally in Newton, the way that's done is to get the school building on the list for the state school building authority and get permission to get it in part state funded. We get about 30% state funded. The process for doing that, though, is very, very long. And it's a reasonable question to say, is it worth it for us to wait 10 years to rebuild a school that needs to be rebuilt to save the 30%, or to do it more quickly and spend less money than we would have anyway?
That's a really good question. I grew up in New York City, and well, at the time there were a lot of old schools, but it's always seemed to me, I'm a property owner as well, it seemed to me that you kind of, if it's your own house, your own building, you maintain them. I think there's kind of an absence. I don't want to spend time talking too imaginatively here, but in my perfect world, you'd kind of offload the maintenance someplace else and give people a basis by which you can measure their maintenance and get it, so the buildings are maintained. You don't need to keep buying a new high school, every 40 years or something like that.
But let me give you another example in a different arena. Every now and then we put out a contract for the school buses for transportation. Do you know how many bids we get? One.
Well, that's an open question.
And it's also the same for most of the surrounding communities.
Yeah.
So the question is, why is there so much market concentration among the school bus companies so that there isn't competition in Eastern Massachusetts for school bus contracts? Who should be looking at that? Well, perhaps, I'm not saying that's necessarily an issue for the Newton schools alone, but it would certainly seem to be an issue where the Attorney General might want to look at.
That's really an interesting question, and we're going to leave it at that. I had a great time. I hope you did too.
I did, thank you.
And please, you're welcome to come back anytime. And we have an election coming up soon, and Paul Levy is running for school committee. I hope you give him some consideration, and as well, touch base with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And I think that's going to pretty much do it for the last day of summer. This was an awesome time.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you. So I